NATO is developing land corridors in Europe to deploy the more than 300,000 U.S.-led troops there to positions along Russia's borders in the event of war. That, according to Lieutenant General Alexander Salfrank, the head of NATO's JSEC Logistics Command. He said NATO's High Command was concerned over possible bottlenecks in troop and material movements that were evident in recent war games. A direct conflict with NATO would be an existential threat to Russia, according to Moscow, considering the bloc's superiority in conventional forces. Consequently, any such action would risk the deployment of nuclear weapons under Russia's nuclear doctrine. The U.S. and its allies claim that Moscow has plans to attack NATO and that it's sending arms to Ukraine to help stall or prevent such action. Moscow denies having any such intentions, saying that these are false threats intended to deceive the populations of Western countries about the intentions of their governments. Russian officials see the hostilities with Ukraine as a U.S.-initiated proxy war in which Ukrainian soldiers serve as cannon fodder with weapons, intelligence, training, and planning contributed by the West. Last week, multiple attacks were made on Russia's early warning reconnaissance systems that warned Moscow of possible missile launches by adversaries in order to prepare its missile defense shield in the event of a nuclear attack. Although the attacks reportedly were largely unsuccessful, had the system been crippled, it could have triggered a nuclear response. For more on that, we go to Moscow and speak with analyst and senior geostrategic affairs lecturer Mark Sleboda. Mark?
So last week we were talking about a number of drone attacks, by my count 4, that the Kiev regime, and we must assume it's U.S. and NATO backers, conducted on large over-the-horizon radar systems in Russia's south. Radar systems that are used as part of Russia's nuclear launch early warning detection system, right? This is the type of strategic infrastructure and assets that doesn't play any element in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, but is an absolute, strategic red line. There's absolutely no reason for the Kiev regime to attack these targets, but if the U.S. was looking to erode Russia's ability to detect nuclear launches, particularly in event of a first strike scenario, that is exactly what they would hit. Now, they attacked them with long-range drones. We know that they attacked them with Western drones, an advanced Portuguese drone, the Tecker 3, it's used by the Portuguese and the British, was used on at least one of the attacks. And we've heard previous commentary in the Western mainstream media from Ukrainian military commanders acknowledging that any of these types of long-range attacks in Russian territory, trying to evade Russian air defense and electronic warfare, have to be plotted and mapped out by Western sources using satellite and advanced reconnaissance data. Including there's all of these global hawk flights over the Black Sea and everything else.
So let me be clear something. So there were these multiple attacks on Russia's early warning defense infrastructure, which can only mean to Russia that part of what's being considered by the Americans at the moment is a nuclear first strike on us, and they're trying to take out our ability to detect it early enough to put our defenses up against it.
They have to seriously consider that possibility. Yes, they have no choice.
It serves no other military purpose, right?
Okay, so now, I mean, there are a lot of arguments out there. The Kiev regime did this on their own, rogue, which I have doubts about their ability to do such long-range attacks without Western satellite and reconnaissance data. But with the intention of provoking an extreme Russian response that would help bring NATO directly into the combat. All right. For instance, Russia's nuclear military doctrine specifies, Article 19C, that an attack on Russia's strategic architecture, right, infrastructure, like their detection systems, is itself justification for a nuclear strike on Russia's part. That's how serious this
For
is.
that reason. In other words, whether it's your intent to launch right away or not, I am no longer in a position of confidence to know when you launch.
Exactly. This is DEFCON 2 stuff, right? This is right up the chain to DEFCON 2. Now, I don't believe that Russia is going to retaliate with a nuclear strike, but that's just to drive home how serious this is. Right now, as far as we can tell, no serious damage was done with these drone strikes. Now, it could have been the Kiev regime trying to provoke Russia. It could have been the West, could have been the U.S. behind it trying to provoke Russia. Also, with the intent of provoking a major Russian response that would provide justification for sending U.S. and other Western troops directly into Ukraine. That's a possibility, right? And that's an argument for Russia to exercise restraint. It could have been simply part of a raising the costs for Russia strategic play by the United States, something that they've announced, basically. That's the purpose of these long-range attacks in Crimea and elsewhere, to raise the costs, trying to force Russia to come to the negotiating table sooner on terms more preferable to NATO in Ukraine.
But it could have the opposite effect. I mean, the last thing that you want with two nuclear powers is to undermine the confidence of one of them in their ability to detect a launch.
Well, unless you're crazy. And then, of course, there is the potential that this is part of a first strike scenario, degrading Russia's ability to detect launches, particularly from the south. And remember, the U.S. Fifth Fleet is in that direction, right? Nuclear capable. I mean, all of these things have to be taken. Now, as far as I can tell, according to the Washington Post, U.S. officials leaked that they were concerned by these attacks. The same type of language they've used to talk about the Kiev regime's attacks on Russia's oil infrastructure, which were really just pinpricks that didn't do any appreciable damage. But, the sensitivity of Americans to the idea of anything that could raise the price of gasoline during an election cycle.
Right. And they were about Rafah, and before that about Gaza, et cetera, et cetera.
So, obviously, I don't think that Russia has responded yet. I think they're still calculating a response, checking their intel, which shows incredible restraint. There have been reports that Russia, in response, is going to adopt a strategy of shooting down all unmanned reconnaissance aircraft over the Black Sea belonging to third parties, meaning U.S., UK, whoever puts up a reconnaissance drone over the Black Sea. These things hover below Crimea every single day, right? I mean, back and forth, looking for holes in Russia's air defense and electronic warfare. But, this also, of course, covers the Krasnodar region, where these Voronezh over-the-horizon radar areas were Krasnodar and Orsk. So that would be a potential not quite direct response, but it would be I would say more a related response than an asymmetric response.
What about this one? What about that they decide to take out, say, one small element of their satellite surveillance in kind, and something that would be a part of their early warning system, something like for the UK or whatever.
That would be a more direct response. I have not heard that suggested, but it is certainly possible. The U.S. was warning last week about Russia putting more potential anti-satellite satellites into orbit. Russia has also demonstrated the ability, with their very advanced electronic warfare, the best in the world, in the last few weeks, to completely shut down the supposedly unjammable Starlink. of Elon Musk that the Pentagon has now bought out for use for the Kiev regime in Ukraine. So when the Kharkov offensive started, all of the Kiev regime's communications, which have been happening basically with Starlink, Russia demonstrated the ability to just shut it all down over a large area, not just for hours, but for days. So very serious capabilities being demonstrated by Russia. And on the heels of that, Joe Biden has announced, with a lot of seeming pressure from the mainstream media and from other countries in the West, the United Kingdom and others, to allow long-range strikes, U.S. weapons to be used in long-range strikes in Russia. You want to call it Russia proper, or pre-2014 Russia, meaning not just the Crimea, the Donbass, Kherson, and Zaporozhye, but they're talking particularly about the Belgorod region of Russia north of Kharkov. Now, actually, Western weapons have long been used for this, right? American Bradleys were handed off to what even the New York Times admits are neo-Nazi battalions like the Free Russia Legion, the Russia Volunteers Corps, Kraken, for raids in that area. Bradleys were seen, and other U.S. weapons. Czech Vampire multiple launch rocket systems have been just pummeling Belgorod for over half a year, which is what precipitated the Kharkov offensive to create a cordon sanitaire, as Putin called it anyway, though the Western mainstream media refuses to admit it. But as far as we know, U.S. HIMARS have not been used for such attacks. They've been used plenty on Crimea and Donbass, but they haven't been used into, shall we say, internationally recognized or Western recognized Russian territory before. And now they have been. This is Biden's escalation. However, he did specify, supposedly, at least temporarily, that is restricted to the Belgorod area just north of Kharkov on supposedly just military targets, which the Kiev regime has never restricted itself anyway, with Western weapons. Supposedly only targets that are approved by the U.S. And we've heard before from Western media, New York Times and others, that every single HIMARS strike receives its coordinates from U.S. operators, from satellite data.
And the Russians know that, and to them it means it's been an attack by the U.S. on their eyes against a nuclear attack. As always, Mark, thank you very much for your time and your expertise. And we'll speak with you next week.
Thank you.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.